Well, good day. Hello, ALBW, wherever you are. I'm Pat Escate. I'm the lead organizer of Ann Lister Birthday Week, coming to Halifax, April 2 through 9, 2022. So, from the moment Ann Lister jumped down from that stagecoach in Gentleman Jack, social media exploded. People from around the world started searching for ways that they could learn more, know more, gather together, and find other people who were equally devoted to this amazing character who turned out to be a real person. And in amongst all that joining and swarming, they started to form communities. As you know, we at ALBW are all about community, and today I'm just delighted to be able to celebrate a very special community that exists within Ann Lister world, that of the Codebreakers, that dedicated group of people from around the world who have spent the last 2 years working on the transcriptions of Ann's diaries and journals. This is a project that will reverberate through time. So this morning, before I bring them on, I'd like to run through a little bit about this project so you understand the depth and breadth of it. First of all, we are only going to be talking to a handful of our transcribers this morning. With the Codebreakers, and this is per the archive, West Yorkshire Archive Service, 175 people inquired about joining the project. The highest working total was 140. A partial list of countries involved: Belgium, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, Republic of Ireland, Russia, Spain, Sweden, Canada, USA, and Australia. They decoded 24 complete volumes starting from 1817, which total approximately 3,900 pages and 5 million words. In addition, 65 loose diary pages rather than bound volumes, 14 travel journals of approximately 590 pages. So let's bring on our guests for today. As we said, we have a handful of them, but amongst them, we have Janet Priest, Sam Benyon, Janneke van der Weeden, there we go, Libby Robotham, Alison Kirchgasser, Leanne Porter, and Doriana Sorolla. Hi, how are you?
Hey, good.
So let's get started right away because we have so much to cover. What I'd like to do first is I'd like to ask all of you, what drew you to this project? And Janet, let's just start with you and go right down the list.
Okay, well, after Gentleman Jack, I got very obsessed with Ann Lister, read all the books, and then started searching for something else that I could do. Saw the transcription project, didn't know whether I would be any good at it, so had a go, did a test page, and my first batch arrived. And that was it. That was history.
Locked in. And Sam, how about you, Sam?
Yeah, pretty similar. I mean, it was one of the very few positives of COVID. We were furloughed in the UK when it first started, so 2 years ago, and it stopped things to do really. So I binge watched Gentleman Jack yet again for about the 5th time. Did a bit of research on Anne, found the transcription project, thought I'll have a go. And a bit like Janet, I sent the page in, got my first batch back, and then I stayed with the project right to the end.
Wow, amazing. And Alison, how about you?
Sure. So I'm in the US. I had never heard of Ann Lister. I think most people here hadn't heard of her before Gentleman Jack. But after I watched Gentleman Jack in the summer of 2019, I was astounded that I'd never heard of this amazing woman. I went online to look for everything I could find about her, learned about the transcription project, and applied right away. I was afraid all the slots would be filled. It took some time for me to realize that not everyone thinks this is fun and easy. But I've been involved ever since.
Excellent. Libby?
Well, like everyone else, I watched the series, became totally obsessed with all things Ann Lister. Came up to Halifax to see Jill Liddington speak, went to Shibden Hall, saw excerpts of the diary, joined every Facebook page that vaguely mentioned Ann Lister, noticed that people were starting to post things online and saying, what does this say? And I was thinking, well, I can read that. Oh, I know what they're talking about. And for a while, I was reluctant to apply. And then I thought, excuse the language, sod it, and got in touch with the archive services. And like everyone else, was sent the test pages. And I was just absolutely fascinated by them. And it was just such a treasure to be able to see these. And then I desperately wanted to be part of the project. And I know that the first batch that I sent, well, the test pages that I sent back weren't particularly good, but the guy at West Yorkshire Archives was so kind in taking me through the things that they wanted and how they wanted everything presented. And then from then on, I was hooked right to the end, like everyone else.
They did really something. And Janneke, how about you?
Well, yeah, it starts the same really as all of the others. But I guess after Gentleman Jack, I just went straight for the books. And it was actually a passage in Helena Whitbread's Secret Diary of Miss Anne Lister that triggered me, where she describes Anne attending York Musical Festival. And she describes Handel's Messiah. And I'm a lover of classical music and a keen amateur singer. And so I wondered, I mean, what other music has Anne had in her life? And I wanted to learn more about her travels to the Netherlands as well. And so I very brazenly contacted Anne Schoma on Twitter, and she was very kind and encouraged me to do my own research. She had never heard of anybody having done any research into music. Now, that seemed a step too far for me initially, but she suggested I should start by transcribing the travel notes of the trip to the Netherlands, if that's what I wanted to do. Right. And that was a trip that she took with Marianne Lawton in 1831. And so I gave that a go, and I realized, like Libby was describing, that actually I could actually make out what she was saying most of the time, or, figure out the writing and the scribbling. So then I thought I'll just give that test pages a go as well for the WIAS. And that's it. And they accepted me, and I was thrilled.
Wonderful. How about you, Leanne?
Me too, similar stories to the others. I was just really interested initially with the crypt-hand. So I went online and found the key and decided to give it a go. And then I saw online that the transcription project was up and running and thought, why not give it a shot? And was just absolutely gobsmacked when they said, yes, your test paper's been accepted. And then when I very first received my first batch, I can remember just staring at the pages thinking, what have I let myself into? Like, this is an incredible, just what am I doing? But, after sort of initially studying the pages, and like Janneke said, you realize that you can actually read what she's writing, taking it one step at a time. It was a slow start, but once you get into it, it was an amazing project. So
yeah. And Doriana, how about you?
Well, similar to everyone else, my wife and me were watching Gentleman Jack when it was first shown by the BBC. Obviously got booked, and she gifted me Anne Schoma's book for my birthday. Got hooked on Anne Lister. Both of us bought Helena's first book. Went completely into Anne Lister mode. And then we went on holiday, and we are still checking everything online, to do with Gentleman Jack and Anne Lister. And my wife noticed that there was a call put up by the West Yorkshire Archive Service calling for volunteers to transcribe the actual diaries. And she told me, oh, there's this call. I mean, do you want to do it? And I'm like, yes, please, of course. I mean, up my alley in a million different ways. This insanely magnificent woman, lesbian, geek. Everything. It's English literature indeed. I mean, it's literature. It really is. Linguistics, basically, decoding something. Again, up my alley in a million different ways. And the minute we got back from the holiday, I wrote to West Yorkshire Archive Service and asked for the test pages. And that's how it started.
It really is an amazing project. And even just watching it, kind of watching your processes from the outside, because I would check in over at in the pages where you all were asking questions of one another. And I found that community really fascinating because it felt like everybody was so willing to just jump in and help. And I loved that about the group as a whole. So, and it's amazing. So I keep saying, we have a lot to cover. So we're going to jump into talking about some of the challenges that you ran into when you started the project. Libby, you sent along an image from a travel journal that you said was quite a challenge. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, on the left-hand side of this, Anne has listed the books that she took on holiday with her. And obviously, so it was just working out exactly which volumes and the titles, because she's used some abbreviations there. Bear in mind that there were no paperbacks in those days, so these were all hardback books. So clearly there was no weight restriction when Anne used to go traveling. None of your 23 kilograms like we have nowadays.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so Ryanair, eat your heart out. On the right-hand side, Anne is talking about tips that she's given to people. So she's keeping a list of the expenditure and where people have helped her. But again, it's trying to pick out through the pieces that she'd crossed out and her abbreviations again to make out what and then also obviously you can see that she writes both vertically and horizontally, and just tidying that up so that it could easily be read. So that was the challenge there, and just again dealing with the abbreviations and place names and people's names.
So all those crosses on there, that was her crossing all that stuff out. I wasn't sure if this was your worksheet. You know what I mean?
No. Yeah, what she does, she makes a note in a travel journal and then transcribes all of this herself into her diaries.
Right.
So these are her rough notes, and then once it's copied across, she puts crosses through it. Got it.
And that I had no idea when you sent me that image that was because of course I can't read her handwriting. I had no idea that was a list of the books that she took with her. My God.
Yeah.
Number one, the Bible.
I mean, most of us, that's some holiday read, isn't it?
Yeah, right. What a fun person to travel with.
Yeah.
And next up, Allison, you had a couple of images that you sent to us as well. Let's take a look at those.
Yes. So the image on the left is from the first batch I was assigned, which was the summer of 1818, when her handwriting was actually quite good and nothing like the crossouts that Libby just showed us.
Yeah.
But the challenge here was the languages. Anne often wrote in French and in Latin, which is not too bad because the characters are the same as in English. But in this particular passage, she's at a dinner party and Anne could talk to anyone about anything. And she was arguing with a major in the army. They were talking about studying Hebrew, and they began arguing about the origin of the word amen and whether it came from a Hebrew word or a Greek word. So there are many Hebrew and Greek characters, and she wrote notes to herself in the margin. Again, this is my first batch. I went onto the Facebook group, and fortunately we have people like Doriana and others who speak other languages. The archives didn't require us to translate, but we did need to transcribe exactly. And even grabbing these characters was very challenging. So it was great to have help from others on that.
Wow.
The right-hand side was from my last batch, which was the only batch I had that overlapped with the Gentleman Jack TV show. And it was during the period of time when Anne and Sophie Farrell were traveling from Paris to Copenhagen by carriage. Now, this wasn't mentioned in the show, but they also were traveling with what Anne called Sophie's disagreeable little dog. Now, Anne would use her journals not only to keep track of everything she did, but also to note things like she was very concerned about the cost of the journey and the remaining part of the journey. So the bottom half of this page, she's noting down the cost to travel by steamer from 2 different cities in Germany over to Denmark. And what I found very fascinating is, she broke out costs per person, costs per servants, which were half the price of their masters, as she called them, price per dog, per horse, and per carriage, which I just found fascinating. So you just never know when you turn to a new page what sort of gem you're going to find.
Wow, no kidding. And your description of her at that dinner party and talking about, Latin and Greek and Hebrew, all the rest of it. I would love to have sat next to Anne Lister in a dinner party.
Absolutely.
Because I'm horrible at small talk, but boy, I love stuff like that. So she's my kind of woman. Next, Janet. You furnished us with some slides that show us the difference between the plain hand and the crypt-hand. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, so the reason why I sent these over was because when I started the transcription project, I actually thought that, we are called Codebreakers. So I thought that the coded sections would actually be the hardest bit because you're having to learn a new set of characters and put them into context. And although the crypt-hand, what we call the crypt-hand, was difficult to decipher at first until you got used to it, and because there was very little punctuation in there, although I found out recently that there is punctuation in the crypt-hand, but not in any batches that I actually transcribed. It was actually the plain hand that was the most challenging because I think Anne wrote a little bit more fluently, so it was in her own handwriting. But the thing was that she just abbreviated so many words. So I had a batch and I just looked at how many words she'd abbreviated. And in one batch, 20 pages, there was over 6,000 words that were abbreviated. So it was having to decipher what she was trying to say. And you got into this, you got into the transcription, but it was quite hard at first.
Wow. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that punctuation in just a second. Leanne, you gave us a great list of abbreviations. So let's take a look at those real quick.
Yeah, so these are the margin notes that Anne wrote in the margins of her diary entries. They were quite useful, that kind of you could glance at one page, look down at the margin notes and kind of see what a snapshot of what was happening on each page. So if I take the first two symbols, which are pretty self-explanatory, the L and the N, one for letter, one for note. So Anne would put this in the margin to show that she's either received or sent a letter or a note.
Wow.
Moving on to the next one, you've got the V and the VC. These show a visit or a visit call. And Anne would use these to show whether she'd visited a friend or an acquaintance or vice versa. It's a little confusing to know when she'd use a visit or a visit call, because there was certain sort of rules within society, different etiquette on when you would be allowed to visit or make a visit call on a certain person. So I'm never really sure which one is which. It's a little confusing. Moving on to the cross. Next, there were two types of crosses Anne used, one which I'm sure you're all familiar with, but the first one is the plus sign. This simply shows Anne's reading list. So she was an avid reader, as we know. She would use this in the margins to show books, book titles, passages, extracts, quotes from anything that she'd found interesting when trawling through her books. Moving on to the next cross, which is the times symbol, and the next two symbols. These are all related to sex. So the first one, which most people are familiar with, is the incurring of the cross, and symbol for self-pleasure, or in other words, masturbation. So this was usually followed by a diary entry in her crypt-hand code, and she'd use a phrase, incurred across thinking of Miss Walker, or incurred across thinking of Mariana. The second one, which is like a spiral-shaped swirl symbol, this documents Anne's kiss, which is her ultimate sort of sexual encounters or connections that she had with women. And a kiss suggests a mutual action as opposed to mutual pleasure. And it usually follows a passage in the diary that then distinguishes that the kiss was either the pleasure of her or the other person. So yeah, it's usually to do with the action, not the pleasure. The spiral with the stick is grubbling with finger up queer. So grubbling, I looked in my very handy 1800s dictionary, literally translates as to feel in the dark, but Anne references this to sexually pleasure a woman using her hands. I would imagine through copious amounts of clothing in the era that they were in, 25 petticoats. So the two at the bottom of the page on the right hand side follow on from the kind of sex symbols, and they are to do with her venereal disease, which we know she contracted from Charles Lawton in 1820. So she shows the kind of capital E squiggle is a venereal disease, which would indicate how many times she'd medicated herself, which is usually consisting of injecting herself with mercury. And the venereal discharge, the dots, the next symbol to that, denotes how the flow was of the discharge, which is quite explicit in some places. And the last two are to do with her cousin and Walker's cousin, which is to do with menstruation. So just the date that began. So they're the margin symbols.
Wow, fabulous. Thank you. That is so helpful. And, keep in mind, as we go through this, I fully expect that there's going to be people down the line when they're first trying to read Ann Lister's diary, especially after season 2, that may tune into this, and they're going to be very thankful to all of you for what you're explaining here. Janet, now we have a couple of more things that she throws at us, which is her timings, correct?
Yeah, Ann Lister was very methodical. I mean, I write a diary, and I heard of Ann Lister about 20 years ago, and I changed my diary practice after that. But she notes pretty much everything. So she notes how much she paid for things, people that she met. But one of the things she does every single day is she writes the times of things that happened. So she writes when she got up, and when she went to bed. So these are usually in the margin, and you can see 2 examples here. So on the left hand side, she will have got up at 8:30 in the morning and then went to bed at 10 minutes past 12 in the evening. Being a transcriber, you get different batches from different years, and it was interesting to see that the way that she noted these times changed. So you notice on the left, the earlier one, where she wants to say 10 past the hour, she does 10 over 60. On the later one, she's maybe got a bit lazier or a bit savvier at writing quicker, and she uses 2 dots for the 60. So this completely threw me when I first got this second batch. And it was great that the Facebook page was there to help to work out what I should do to transcribe that. So she always gives you some challenges, does Anne?
So on that 8:25 with the 2 dots underneath the 25, so she's telling us that she had her period?
No, she's just telling us that she got up at 8:25 in the morning.
With the 2 dots underneath.
So the 2 dots will have would have been the time.
If they were 2 dots to the side, that would have denoted the period.
Yeah,
it's over in the margin.
Yeah, if they're underneath the line of the time, that's just omitting.
It's just a shorthand way of saying 60, I suppose.
It's very confusing.
Wow.
Yeah.
You guys are amazing. Already you're amazing. Okay, and then next up we have we're going to move into a section where we start talking about making connections between the transcriptions and Anne's process, how she puts that together. So we have images of, can you just put that next image up? There we go. Thanks. And who sent me this one?
This was me again. This is Janet.
Oh, thank you, Janet. Yeah, sorry. I turned the page.
That's okay, not a problem. No, this was a really interesting thing, because I'd transcribed this phrase or a variation of this phrase hundreds of times. I'm sure the other Codebreakers will agree that when Ann Lister is talking about letters that she's either received or is writing to other people, she says exactly how much of the page she's actually written and how she's written it. So in those days, a letter was usually a single piece of paper folded over and sealed. And then that would then be posted to whoever. And you can see in this quote, she said, 3 pages, the ends and under the seal, and the top of first page. So I just transcribed this, didn't have a clue what I was what it actually meant until I watched a talk at the Ann Lister Research Summit, and then I realised what she was referring to. So I thought, how can she write under the seal? Because the seal will mask the writing, and it wasn't. It was actually to the right of the seal on the page, and the ends were the top and the bottom of that page. So it was almost like a revelation to me that this phrase that I've been transcribing hundreds of times, I actually understood it.
Isn't that it's really interesting because the whole concept of how letters were put together have to do with a bunch of different issues: the cost of paper, the cost of postage, how much room you could fit, how much writing you could fit on something, and it sort of also helps to make you understand why her handwriting was so small.
Yeah, and I know that in some of the letters they were also crossed. So you didn't just have one lot of writing, the page was turned 90 degrees and you had another load of writing. Luckily, I didn't have to transcribe anything that looked like that. I probably would have struggled.
Right. Doriana, you did a really interesting thing after some of your reading. Tell us about this.
Yes, the top of this image is Anne's actual sketch from her journal from date from June 1840. It was made. It is a vista of mountains seen from the road back to Tbilisi from Baku, where she and Anne Walker made an excursion. So they're on the way back to Tbilisi, and they stopped off at the station, and there was this quite striking conical mountain on the left there in the image. And I thought, goodness, surely there can't be many of these in what is today's Azerbaijan, which is where they were. So I thought, why don't we research this a bit and try and find which mountain it is, and perhaps the actual spot where the sketch was actually made. And I managed to track it down. I managed to track the mountain. It's called Mount Goyazan in today's Azerbaijan. And I was trolling the internet for it some more for quite some time, and I actually managed to find the bottom image, which is a modern photograph of basically the same place, the same vista from roughly the same place where Anne and Anne stopped off on the way back to Tbilisi, and where Anne actually made the sketch. That made me very, very happy.
Wow. That's fascinating. There's a lot of sketches in her diaries, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, they did have, photos back then, and she was just too early for photographs to sort of become a thing. And obviously, you were somewhere when you're fascinated by and wow, this is magnificent. You want to make a record of it somehow, and she did all sketches.
Yeah, I think we have another sketch coming up with some of that in the not too distant future. And then, Doriana, you found yourself going down one of those famous Anne Lister rabbit holes, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I speak for all of us when I say that when we are transcribing, we are also researching all the time, because you have to, not just because you're curious, or what is she actually doing, who is this person she's talking to, where is this area then. But very often you have to do research in order to actually transcribe, because sometimes she scrolls terribly, and this is an example of it. So this is June 1834. She's basically on her honeymoon, but they're in London. She's feeling poorly, and Lady Stuart has brought a physician with her to try and treat her, and he's Dr. Freeman. And Anne mentions his address, and this is the address. And if you can read the top left bit without reference to what is below, you should be an Anne Lister transcriber. And the is also not very readable. So I couldn't read this, and I need to transcribe this. What on earth is she saying? So I spent a whole afternoon trolling through the internet, and thank God for the internet. I mean, if you were transcribing this 20 or 30 years ago, I don't know how we would manage. Wow. And I managed to track down this guy in a contemporary medical directory, and it gives his address, and it's Spring Gardens. I mean, if this is spring, then honestly, Anne, seriously, she wasn't writing this in a carriage. I know that for certain, so I don't know what happened there. And this is the sort of thing that you have to do all the time.
And to be fair, maybe if I could just jump in, because we have to be fair and also admit that Anne doesn't always get everything right. And I've noticed, especially in her travels, where she writes down place names and she gets them completely wrong. I mean, in this case, maybe she just remembered it as Spin Gardens or whatever. I mean, that's what it looks like, more than spring, right? So yeah, she'll, I mean, in my experience from...
Nothing, I mean, this, goodness, I mean, there's no N, there's no G. Who knows what she was trying to write?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like an inquiring mind. And then the next thing we have, Janet, you sent this along, kind of Anne as a real person, the things that we find in there. Tell us about this.
Yeah, this really sort of jumped out to me when I transcribed it, and it's not the most exciting bit of Anne's diary at all. But what it made me feel is that, you know, over 200 years ago, this person was acting pretty much as I normally act and losing things. She got a box of letters and she was sorting through them, and she thought Mariana had given her back the letters that Anne had wrote to her for whatever reason, and she couldn't find them. So she thought she'd lost them. So Anne being Anne, decided to make an inventory of the letters in the box. And while she was doing the inventory, found the letters that she'd not found before. So you know, when you sort of think, she was actually, this was the bit where I thought she just does things that all of us do. You know, I've looked for things before that I thought were lost, did a bit of a look and then found them again. So it really brought home to me that this was actually a real person that I am actually transcribing these diaries for, and that she is the same as us. And, you know, the most mundane thing in the world, just, you know, sorting through some letters, and I'll remember that bit forever. It's very odd.
I understand that. I understand exactly what you're saying, because we often enter into this from, I think a lot of people enter into looking at the diaries because they're just curious about what they look like. And then once you start running down that rabbit hole, it's almost impossible not to keep going. There's so much about her that's so evocative in her writing. One of the passages or the groupings of passages that have had the biggest impact on me is when she talks about, for several months after the incident at Blackstone Edge, and everything that I've read in the diaries surrounding that, the pain that she's going through, it's so obvious that she's working out her, it's like her own kind of therapy, that she's working that out in the journal in terms of how she's dealing with this entire event. Did any of you guys have Blackstone Edge in your transcriptions?
No, I'd have given my right arm for that one, even though it's painful, you know, just.
Right. Yeah, very. And then Sam, we have your favorite diary transcription quote.
Yeah, I mean, this could be a bit controversial because for the Mariana fans, it's probably not the best one to actually read, but I loved it because Anne is a great wordsmith. And I have to say, in every batch I had, there was probably at least 3 or 4 words I'd never come across before that I had to look up and learn new English words. But this for me was just fantastic. We never knew what batches we were going to get. So this was May 1834. So it was when Anne was actually with Anne Walker. And she basically sums up in 7 words her decades of relationship with Mariana. And I just love the fact that in 7 words, she can sum that up. And for dramatic effect, let's underline it as well. And so that was, I guess, my favorite quote.
Wow. Accepted, refused, accepted, married, offended, refused, repented. Wow.
Indeed.
That's pretty much it in a nutshell.
I'll wait for the Team Mariana comments to come on now.
Okay, and then Libby, we have another image from you up here.
Yes, I mean, this isn't a particularly challenging or cryptic note, but and so it does actually make for easy reading and understanding for the audience. But what it represents really is just a charming view. You know, it's a snapshot of Anne's journey over hills and through villages, accompanied by music. Because this is something that we tend to rather take for granted these days, when we can always get in the car and turn on the radio. But those days, they would have travelled in silence or in conversation. So how lovely to have some live musicians play and rendering their journey just so much more enjoyable. And what fun they must have had.
Oh, this is such a great quote to pull out of here, because it's true. You know, we do have the ability. We can turn on radio, you know, put your headphones on, listen to whatever you've got on your device. But all they had, if you unless you knew how to whistle,
Yep.
you had to find somebody who could play an instrument or sing or, right?
Or
Yeah.
play yourself.
Right. Well, there you go, Janneke, and you sing. you said.
Well, I mean, this is what Anne played the flute, didn't she? She did a lot of practicing, especially in the early years of playing the flute. And she often references music when she's staying with Ver, for example, in 32. It's every night she just, I mean, I wish she would say a little bit more about it, because she usually just writes music, and you want to know, well, what music? But you know that they do it, and they entertain each other and sing together and play. So it's great.
Yeah.
I want to know more. I mean, this is my mission.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so much more in there to, to possibly find out. Janneke, we're going to you next again. And let's talk a little bit about this first image that you've passed along to us.
Well, yeah, what was funny about the project, and people have mentioned it as well, was that groups of people were just put to work on different parts of the journals. And so when I started, some of my newfound transcribing friends were working on journals of the 1820s and early 30s. And I was given my very first batch from December 36. So this was full of coal and landscaping, and Anne having settled into living together. But the very first full day that I had on my very first page, it included Anne and Anne spending an evening together looking over the maps of Holland and Germany. And that made my heart leap, because obviously, hey, that's where I live, in the Netherlands. And it's just nice to have that little link, and to see that on your first page was nice.
Yeah, really fascinating, actually, how that works. And then you also had a page here about her work at the estate.
Well, yes. I mean, there was a lot of work on the estate, and then actually, I must say that this is related to that. But the page is actually from her traveling in Russia in 18. When was this?
Good question.
1840. Sorry, this was 1840. And so what's happening here is that she's actually making notes, and there's another doodle at the bottom there that you can see, where she's making a sketch of a railing that she particularly fancied, and possibly for applying at Shibden. And I just love the fact that wherever she went on her travels, that she was always thinking of using things that she saw, or maybe applying it at Shibden, relating everything that she sees in the world to what she knows as well. Like, I mean, this is slightly different, but for example, she always compares all the cathedrals that she goes to with York Minster.
Really?
And they always fail in comparison to York Minster, by the way.
Really?
Because that is basically the best minster in the world, according to Anne. But it's just cool how she always describes what she sees, makes drawings of what she sees and what appeals to her and what she wants to take home, and maybe in this case use it as a railing at Shibden.
I'm sorry, I'm looking through my notes because someone did, and I don't think that we wound up putting this in here. Let me just ask you, did we put the parasol image thing in? No, okay. Someone had sent me a transcript of Anne measuring something.
Yeah.
And she, right, but she refers to it as her parasol. Who was it that gave me that quote?
It was me.
Oh, good, Doriana.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
you were a little perplexed when you first read that she was how many parasols, right?
Yeah. She was in Belgium, and she was snooping around an industrial site that she wasn't strictly let into, but she just went in there anyway, as she would. And there's a little sketch in her journal of a tool shed on the estate, and it's measured in 2.3 or 235 whatever parasols. And I'm like, for a second I thought, what sort of strange measure is this? Is this like the Persian parasangs like they have in classical literature? And then, parasol. She had an umbrella with her, and she whipped it out and she measured the shed.
Brilliant.
3 parasols.
Right? What a mind. What a mind. Now, Leanne, you take us back here with your next slide. What many people don't know is that she had more than one code, and this is one of them. So tell us a little bit about this.
Oh, she did indeed. Yeah, I was transcribing a page from March 1818 and was just writing in a diary about a letter that she'd received from her sister Mariam. And popped up in amongst her writing was this sentence that I just couldn't decipher. I stared at it for just minute after minute, just thinking, what is this? It wasn't French, it wasn't Latin, it wasn't Greek. Often she kind of breaks into different languages, and it just completely baffled me. So my only hope was the Facebook Codebreakers site. So I took a screenshot of it and sent it to the group, and thankfully received quite a few replies. One lady had apparently came across something similar and had got in touch with Helena Whitbread, and Helena had explained that Anne, in fact, did have another code, a crypt-hand that she devised herself. Differs slightly from the crypt-hand because, as you can see on the screen, it largely consists of consonants, dots, and lines. So it was modernly named the Consonant Jungle.
Wow.
There was a lady online called Era Blaze who I came across, who thankfully had done all the research before me. So all I had to do was use the code. Doriana also, as you can see on the screen, then made a key for everybody to use, which was really helpful. So thank you, Doriana. And my understanding of this code is that Anne used it with Mariana to fool Charles, basically. Unlike the crypt-hand code, which was just a continuous line of symbols, numbers, Latin symbols, the consonant jungle blended in more with a normal handwriting. So at a glance, looking at a letter, Charles wouldn't have noticed there was anything unusual about that particular letter. So yeah, absolutely baffled me. Just yet another fascinating fact about Anne. So if anybody's interested, it's worth looking online. The story of Era Blaze and how she came to actually decipher the code.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And in a completely separate conversation with a completely separate guest and a completely separate ALBW Live, we got into a short conversation about the fact that there's been a lot of thought that it was actually Eliza Rain that developed the initial code, right? Because she was the one who was interested in math, etc., and that as two young women together, they developed it, and then of course Anne took it on. But I found that really fascinating. It's just another bit about Eliza Rain that doesn't get enough focus, you know.
Very true. Yes.
Yeah. Steph, before you put up the last slide, Doriana, there's two things that you had given to me, and we're going to put that last slide up after this. But you talked about a poignant memory. No, not that one. I didn't want that one right now. Yeah. You talked about a different part of this, a poignant memory about Anne seeing a flower-covered hill. Tell us about that.
That was in Georgia during her excursions in the mountains during the last few weeks of the journal that we have. So the last few weeks of journal entries that we have for Anne Lister ever, and they have a stopover somewhere during this excursion, and she looks at a hill, and it's covered by a certain kind of flower. And she says that it reminds her of a particular kind of flower that she used to gather on the wall above Market Wheaton when she was 12 years old, in order for flowers to be dried and made into a medicinal tea for her sister, for Marianne. And it's just, it's completely unexpected. I just came across it, in the middle of this reading about traveling in Georgia and all these adventures. At this point, 12 years old, thinking about the sister, thinking about she was gathering this medicine to make her sister feel better, and it's like, and in a few weeks' time, she'll write her last journal entry that we know of, and the next month
she was gone. And something about what struck me about this part, that when you sent it to me, and I looked through it at the first time, it's obvious that Anne was thinking about going home. She was thinking about home at that point. And then, of course, you came across this really poignant line.
Yeah, there's so many wonderful quotes from the diary, both comical and sarcastic and humorous, and then on the other end of the spectrum, sad and poignant. And this is the saddest 6 words that I ever transcribed from the entire diary and travel notes. This is in Tbilisi after Brianna and Walker had another of the tiffs about money, about how much money they were spending on this trip. And she muses about, she was still thinking about where to go next, what the traveling plans should be. And at this point she decides, okay, fine, we've had enough. We'll just, move around Georgia for a bit, in the mountains and so on. And then we are going to go we are going to cross the Black Sea, go to Crimea, Odessa, and then Moscow, and then back home.
Right.
And this is part of that decision. So we will go home to the place.
For those of you who don't know, because there's always new people here, Kutaisi is where she actually died. We still don't know precisely what it was. It sounds like it was some kind of infection that she got from a tick. But our dazzling ancestor ended her days there.
Well, it was prophetic, wasn't it? She did go home from there.
Yeah,
she did indeed.
Yeah, not quite as she planned.
From steam and not alive, but yes, she did.
Yeah, she did go home, and sad moment for all of us. So tell me something. In closing, I'd love for each one of you to tell me what you may have learned about yourself in this process. And I'm going to start at the same place we started at the beginning. Janet?
About myself, it's really just to know that I'm not really a historian. I don't really do lots of history, but this has actually made history tangible to me. So it's been an absolute privilege to actually work on this project and bring it to the general public and get Anne Lister's diaries, out there and available for people to read. So I just felt really privileged to be part of a project like this, in a subject that I don't normally delve into. So yeah, out of my comfort zone.
There you go. And so you're capable of finding other things outside of your comfort zone, aren't you?
Definitely. Yeah.
How about you, Sam?
I think it probably goes full circle to when you started, Pat, actually. I think for me, the thing I learned was you're never too old to make new friends and to be part of a community. In all seriousness, Alison and I, we communicate 3-4 times a week. I've adopted Alison's mom as my American mom. Hello, Marjorie. I've got friends in Scotland like Jean. Most of the people on this screen I know really well. And, you kind of get to a certain age, but it's just been amazing to meet all of these people, usually through the Facebook, I have to say, but they're so helpful. Nobody ever criticizes or makes you feel stupid. It's just been an absolute revelation. And I think going into ALBW, if I dare say it, I'm as excited about seeing people face to face as the events that you've actually got planned. So that for me is what I've learned about myself.
Yeah, it's really quite something. Yannicka, how about you?
Well, I guess one of the struggles that I came across was that rather than having less to do during the pandemic, which some people did experience, I actually was busier than ever work-wise. And this caused quite a lot of stress. And funnily enough, not just because of the work itself, but mainly because I felt I hadn't enough time to contribute to this project as much as I wished. So let alone all the terribly exciting projects that people were involved with, like Packed with Potential and Lister Summits and all that. So, but during the course of this, and also harking back a little bit back to what was said just before, I managed to relax into it. And I've come to the conclusion that the beauty of all of this was that we are all doing it together. And that this wonderful group of Codebreakers who've just been so marvelous at supporting one another through Facebook and through Twitter. And actually, I'd like to add that it's not over yet. Like, do not despair, because I think that we want to all look out at ask everyone, like all the Codebreakers, but also other people who love reading Anne's journals, maybe to look out for future announcements of Pact with Potential, because for further added value to researchers, it would be absolutely marvelous if we could all start or continue helping filling in the brilliant trackers that they have there. And we're all working on a tool that should help us focus our efforts on that as well. So maybe stay tuned for more on that from Pact with Potential. Little plug there.
Libby.
Well, I am surprised that I could become quite so immersed in something to the exclusion of all else, to the point where any distraction was most unwelcome, which irritated family and friends. I mean, I'll echo what Sam and Yannicka and Janet have said. I mean, it's just such a privilege to be part of this, to be working with such a lovely group of people, such great intellect, but there's no egos. Everybody's been wonderfully, wonderfully supportive. And I mean, it's just been such a joy. I don't think I've ever been so happy. I was genuinely sort of euphoric working on it and what spawned from it. I mean, I found quite a lot of similarities between myself and Gentleman Jack or Anne Lister in terms of fact, I'm one of 5 kids. I've got a sister called Marion, with whom I have a bit of a love-hate relationship. I didn't get on great with my dad. I always enjoyed the activities of boys rather than girls, you know, always been a tomboy, used to sneak out at night after everybody else had gone to bed, but I didn't go looking down the streets for, you know,
bad girls,
just being naughty. I mean, I had a compulsion to buy books where money might have been better spent elsewhere. And finally, I'll confess here that I stalked the object of my desires as a teenager. So I can quite understand Anne, you know, and the pursuance of her ladies. So, yeah. And I think that Anne was interested and interesting. And I'd like to think as part of this, it's made me become a bit more interesting because now I've always got a conversation because of the breadth of subjects that we're all looking at. I've got a conversation starter wherever I go. So thank you, Anne Lister. My
wonderful. Well said. Alison.
Sure. So I had always thought of myself as someone who was fairly well read, but after getting to know Anne Lister, I know I'm nothing like the amount of reading that she did. She read so many books each day, each week, each month, and the breadth of topics is just outstanding for someone who was self-educated, self-motivated, couldn't go to university. It's just so inspiring. So I've upped my reading game, and one of my retirement projects is to attempt to read as many of the Anne Lister books as possible. Yannicka talked about the trackers on Pact with Potential. There's a fun tracker called Anne Lister's Bookshelf where you can, you know, Codebreakers listed every single book she mentioned. So there's many books on that list, and I find that so inspiring.
Wow, that's incredible. Leanne, how about you?
So I think the biggest thing I've learned through this whole project is self-acceptance. You know, I've been with my partner who is absolutely amazing. Her name's Abby. She's watching. We've been together for 15 years and, you know, we have a really happy relationship, but I've still always had that kind of feel that need to apologize for who I am when I'm speaking to other people, maybe. And I think throughout this whole project, I've realized through Anne and her courage and her determination and her attitude towards life that it's just completely unnecessary. I don't need to feel that way anymore. And I guess it's just given me that courage to just take on new challenges and just view life as, you know, this is who I am and that this is me, basically. So, you know, it's been quite a profound experience in that sense.
Good for you. Well done. Doriana.
I think 2 things mainly. One, once upon a time, I used to be an academic linguist, and one of the many reasons that I abandoned that was that I just wasn't enjoying any of it anymore. And during this whole analyst transcribing, researching, getting involved in just about any project going, I realized I am enjoying it again. I'm so happy doing this research. I'm so happy doing all of this. I'm so happy spending every scrap of my free time doing it, and it's just been wonderful. And I've been reveling in my geekness, and trying to find everything about this amazing woman and trying to get everyone to know about her, who was this proud geek,
Yeah.
apart from everything else,
Yeah.
interested in absolutely everything, reading everything, that interested in an amazing variety of subjects, and she was so like me in that respect. And another thing is, 200 years ago, I mean, she was not a coward, not afraid, knew exactly who she was not ashamed, and this is just mind blowing, and we should all keep it, in front of our minds all the time.
Yes, we should. We absolutely should, because all of those things are true. And what a great role model for all of us from that perspective. So we now have people asking questions. Are you ready? Let's get in here. Okay, this is from Jane Kendall. Other than Anne Lister herself, do you have a favorite character from the journals that you've transcribed? Anybody want to field this one? Anybody find a favorite person in those journals besides Anne?
I think I'd like to have met Tib.
What's that, Sam?
I think I would have liked to have met Tib. She sounds quite an interesting character. I certainly would have been able to sit down and have a drink with her, that's for sure. I'm not sure about this snuff, but I think Tib looks a really quite interesting, albeit a little bit sort of sad character, I think, for me. Yeah. And I'm really looking forward to season 2, Gentleman Jack, because I think we know who's playing that part, and I think that will be really interesting. Joanne Scanlon is a fantastic actress, so.
Yeah, that's really going to broaden our the season 2, but with introducing Tib, that's going to broaden our whole conversation one more time, because brilliant Sally is going to bring all of that to the screen in a way that is going to touch us and interest us, and I can't wait personally. Next question, because we have a limited amount of time, so I'm going to ask one person from the group to pipe up on these rather than go around the circle. From Jem J. On. Okay. What is the best piece of information you have transcribed in the diaries?
I can talk about something that I found. So people who've seen Gentleman Jack can remember that Mariana always promised she'd go to Anne when Charles dies. So when Charles dies was a big part of the show. I transcribed, I think it was May of 1829. Anne was living in Paris, and she received a letter from Mariana, and Mariana described a horrific carriage accident that Charles was in, and he nearly died. I mean, his tenants came to mourn him because they really thought it was that bad. Wow. And so when Charles dies, almost happened in 1829. And what was interesting is Anne and Mariana, neither one of them in their letters to each other mentioned the fact that their lives almost changed at that point.
Wow. Interesting.
So that was fascinating.
Nothing in crypt-hand, nothing, no secret little message to the world.
No, I was so surprised by that.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, this is from Schiffer Verheiden. Do you think Anne, this is always a good question. Do you think Anne would have wanted her journals and their transcriptions to be open to the public? Who wants to take that one?
I do want to say hello to my fellow Dutchie there, because Sifra is.
Okay. Now that you raised your hand, now you get to answer that one.
I guess it is the question that we all wonder, and I vary. Sometimes I think that she would be quite happy knowing that so many people enjoy her writing. Mm-hmm. I think she'd be quite surprised that people would enjoy her writing, but also sometimes you come across such personal details where you wonder if that was really meant to go out there. I think maybe she would have, had she lived longer, she might have written something with touching into the journals, taking stuff out of the journals, and maybe come to an autobiography type of thing. But no, I mean, there's stuff in there.
Yeah,
that's too personal, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to say it really is an uncensored autobiography, isn't it? And a friend of mine who only recently started to read one of Helena Whitbread's books said she was quite well off. Why was she always mending her clothes? And this was something that I could imagine her being really ashamed of people knowing. In fact, I had one of my transcriptions, she'd put made coffee in crypt. So she obviously didn't want anybody to know that she'd made coffee.
Oh, that's funny. Wow. Okay, let's see. This is from Jack Gadsby. Are there some parts of the diaries that are still indecipherable even with the code? For example, words that are unique to Anne that are not used elsewhere. Anyone?
Don't know.
Have you run into anything in your particular transcriptions that you had not seen or could not decipher?
Well, there's probably an odd word here and there that we just couldn't decipher because it was scrolled, because it was
You know,
just not readable. Whole parts of the diary is not real.
The other thing that's interesting about that is that what we don't have all the time is context for what she's writing. We assume context in what she's writing, but we don't really understand all the ins and outs of how people spoke or what things meant or what might have been considered a slam or a compliment or any of that. So I think at some level that could sort of answer that question. But in general,
she certainly got into Fronglade way before Punch magazine ever got into it, where you've got several words of English and then suddenly this is a foreign word. Take that. But from context, you managed to work out what it might be.
Fascinating. Next one. This is from Kirsten Holzgrabe. What is your favorite event or moment in the diary?
I think I just loved her travels through France, because having lived in France for a time, it was just wonderful to be seeing the names of places that I recognised, and being able with my atlas to follow the journey. Although I did find that she always went down the join between two pages in my atlas. She seemed to curiously go down where I couldn't pick out the names. But I suppose that was what I quite enjoyed.
I think the thing that's challenging about this question, Kirsten, is that the Codebreakers were all dealing with pieces of the diary, so it's hard to kind of make that general overall statement of what might be your favorite thing, because you're really limited within the context of what you were transcribing. And we've covered some of that.
Selecting, because there are so many wonderful moments, and which one do I choose?
Right? Yeah. Okay, this is the last one. This is from Lucia Falzari. Is there a page of the journals you transcribed that you'd like to see in person?
I can answer this one because I wanted to see the Blackstone Edge page, and in particular the Rousseau quote of I know my own heart, and had the pleasure of visiting the archives and bumping into Pat herself when she was there. And luckily, there was a diary page, there was a few selected diaries out on show, one of which was that specific diary. So I had the privilege of flicking to that page and finding that particular quote, which was absolutely beautiful. And I was really surprised how small her handwriting is, because when you see it on screen, it looks so much larger than it actually is in reality.
Yes.
So but that was the one quote that I really wanted to see in the flesh, which was brilliant.
Which you really got a chance to do.
Yeah, I think I actually got out of there, got out the archives and burst into tears, because it was just it was wonderful just to see and hold and touch an actual diary.
Yeah.
So it could have been any one of them really, but
Oh, sorry, Pat, go on.
Go ahead. No worries. Go ahead.
Well, when I was up in Halifax in August with a friend, and we decided to recreate the Blackstone Edge journey. So we walked to Shibden from Halifax, and then we set off to Blackstone Edge. But part of the way we were walking on the A58, which is all brutalist concrete. And somebody said, why don't you walk on the canal? It'll be much prettier. But of course, that took us off route. And so I said, if we get to Hebden Bridge, it's the other side of Hebden Bridge. But the problem was we'd gone left and Blackstone Edge was right. So after we'd walked 14 miles, we decided to just adjourn to the pub and do Blackstone Edge another time. It took us 7 minutes to get back on the train.
Well done. Well, on that note, I want to thank every single one of you for coming on board. And I want to thank every single one of the Codebreakers that are out there that aren't part of this group today.
Yeah.
As I said in the beginning, I didn't say this, but you've made a difference, which is a particular goal of mine, to find some way to make a difference every day. And you've made a huge difference. The fact that we're going to now be able to look at the entire diary at some point, once all the transcriptions are put into a new edition, et cetera, is just completely amazing. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, especially for those Codebreakers that are out there, that there's two things happening at ALBW. First of all, the West Yorkshire Archive Services is having a special little celebration for you all. I know you all know about that already, at least the people here on the screen. So they want to thank you and get you in there so you can take your trip through the diaries, et cetera, which they'll have laid out for you, which is really exciting. And then the other thing is we have a workshop with the Codebreakers. So anybody out there that's interested in about what you've seen today, or about how the transcriptions happened, or what the experience was like, the Codebreakers are going to be in session in one of the free workshops at ALBW. So I urge you to stop by. So with that being said, Steph is, before you do this, Steph's going to put up a page that will give you some links to some of the blogs, et cetera. But when we come back, the rest of the Codebreakers won't be on screen. So I just want to thank you again, each and every one of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And there we go. So for those of you that are interested, here's the Ann Lister Diary Transcription Project link, as well as 3 of the Codebreakers who are here today have their own blogs. So you can find those at these addresses. And then there are more Codebreaker transcriptions and blogs listed via the AL Index and over at that fabulous Pack with Potential. So please do take a look at that. If I realize it's really hard to write that all down while we're sitting here, but you'll be able to go to the recorded version on Facebook and also on the YouTube site if you want to get a closer look at that. So with that, we are definitely done right now with this particular interview. Want to let you know that coming up on ALBW Live, we have 2 more ALBW Lives in February. On February 5th, this one I'm particularly interested in and excited about. We're doing an interview with Esther Newton. And Esther was a pioneer in gender studies, starting back in the 60s, 50s and 60s. She's a fascinating woman who's published a book called My Butch Career. So we're going to be covering a couple of things about gender studies and especially about being butch. And then on February 19th, we have the fabulous Jill Liddington coming back. Always a delight. And she's going to be talking about the new edition of her book, along with some other things that we're going to be seeing in season 2 of Gentleman Jack. So looking forward to that. And in the meantime, I do hope that all of you out there listening are making plans to come to ALBW. If you haven't made plans yet, we still do have tickets available. There are several things that have sold out, but we have a ton of things that haven't, including the fabulous evening with Sally Wainwright and O'Hooley and Tito at the Victoria Theater. So please do plan on coming, because I don't know about you, but I'm really tired of social media. I had such a great time meeting so many of you at the Memorial Weekend in September, and I can only imagine what it's going to be like where we have, instead of maybe 25 or 30 people, where we've got 700 of you. So come on down. So until then, big thanks to my team, Steph and Kat, as always, and I will see all of you in Halifax.